My grandma was a twin. And as some of you know, most twins are fraternal. They're not identical. Only 1 out of 3 sets of twins are actually identical. 2 out of 3 are just fraternal. And my grandma was one of those. In fact, there was always a theory that twins ran in my family, which made my parents very nervous, especially after I came along. You know, the thought of having another of me was more than they could bear. But the reality is that when my grandma was born in 1890, her brother, her fraternal twin, was named Henry, which led the priest to baptize my grandma, despite the fact that when asked, "What name have you given to your daughter?" they said, "Mary." He baptized her Henrietta because he thought that would be cute. Henry and Henrietta, you know, the twins. In any case, twins are something that are a part of our society. The thing that strikes me is that John's gospel is the only place where in the New Testament, Thomas is called the twin. The New Translation, they use the Greek Didymus, which doesn't help anything at all. You know, it strikes me that it's odd that John would make that point, that Thomas was a twin. It doesn't tell us who was his twin. Could have been Mary of Magdala. Could have been James the Less. It could have been Bartholomew. We don't know. It probably wasn't Andrew or Peter because we're told that they were brothers. Same with James and John. But who was Thomas's twin? John only says that he had a twin. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that this week. In fact, Tuesday morning at 4 o'clock, I woke up in the morning writing this homily. And what was going through my head was the fact that, you know, I don't know. Maybe John just wanted to make the point that there were others like Thomas along the way. Because he's identified as a twin twice in the Gospel of John. Once, we just heard that on the 5th Sunday of Lent, when Jesus said that he was going down to Judea to wake Lazarus. They said, "Well, don't go. They're trying to kill you down there." And he said, No, you don't understand. Lazarus has died, and I'm going there to wake him. And Thomas is the one who says, "Let's go with him and die with him." You know, Thomas is not a coward. He's not a fool. You know, there's something about him that he just is really gung-ho all the way with Jesus, you know, and it's no halfway. And so it didn't surprise me as I reflected on Thomas, the fact that, you know, after Jesus died, something inside of Thomas died as well. And he just refused to believe that Jesus could have been raised from the dead, that Jesus was alive. And I think that in this room there are those who are Thomas's twin. Those who have, along the way, prayed, asking God to spare the life of a relative, a friend, to somehow make something happen, and it didn't. And a part of them just gave up on God. You know? Well, yes, God is there for you, but maybe not for me. God hasn't been there for me. Somehow, God let this happen to me, and obviously, you know, God's care is not the same for us all. They have that doubt. And I understand the doubt. You know, people every now and then will come to the sacrament of penance, and they'll confess the fact that they have doubts. At which point I usually say, congratulations. Good. which means you have faith. Because faith only exists in an atmosphere that includes doubt. It's just like these plants. If it wasn't for the fact that they exist in an atmosphere that contains carbon dioxide, they would all die. There has to be something that enables them to grow. I think doubt is very much a part of growing in faith. That I have to wrestle with that along the way. 45 years of being a priest, I've had more than a few people say to me, "Father, prove God's existence." I can't do that. Oh, there are all kinds of philosophical discussions you could have. My favorite is always the one that presented by Thomas Aquinas, one of his 5 proofs of God, and it's the unmoved mover that, someone had to start all of this in motion. It's kind of like lining up all the dominoes or whatever and pushing the first one. Someone had to hit the first one. And he says that's a proof of God's existence. Not to someone who doesn't believe. Trust me. I've tried that one. Doesn't work. No, there's no proof for God's existence. That's the great reality. In my lifetime, and certainly over the course of my 72 years, I've had experiences of God's presence in my life. Times that I know that God has been there. Times that I've been encouraged, led, pushed even to go in a direction that I wouldn't have chosen. But somehow I knew that this was God leading me there, and that the God who called me there would be there when I arrived, that God would be there through it all. But can I prove that? No. I just have come to believe, despite the doubts that are there. As someone said, well, maybe you're delusional. I suppose there's probably a lot of truth to that one. But, the reality is that I have no other answer other than to say the presence of God. And that's the reality. I think what John is telling us today is about that faith that you and I have come to embrace. The reason we're here is because Jesus suffered and died and rose to raise us up as well, to transform us, to make us children of God. Last Saturday evening, 5 of our members were baptized. They were reborn as God's children. 11 were confirmed. 12 received Eucharist for the first time. They came to believe, to put their trust in God. Does that mean that they will have doubts? Probably. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with the doubts. It's only giving in to them that becomes a problem. The reality is that I think Thomas has lots of twins, both those who have given up, but thanks be to God, even more who have said yes despite the doubts. Because in the end, while we cannot prove God's existence, we cannot disprove it either. There's a story that I read this week in preparing for the homily that I really liked. It was a story of a young man who was in a scripture class who had a professor who was rather intimidating. But for whatever reason, this one day, he decided to stay after class. And the professor was packing up his briefcase, and the student approached him and said, "Sir, do you really believe what's in the Bible?" And the professor took off his glasses and looked at him and realized that this wasn't a trick question, it was a serious question, one that needed to be honored. And he said with resignation, he said, "I don't know." He said, "I don't know. But this much I do know, that there were people hiding behind locked doors. There were people who were living in fear of their lives, who suddenly came out and began to proclaim the good news of Christ crucified. They began to proclaim the good news of Christ risen from the dead. And they were willing to give their life for that. Something happened in that room. I don't know exactly what it was. I don't know how. But they weren't the same. That much I do know. I believe. I don't know, but I believe. Faith, my brothers and sisters, is not knowing. It's saying yes, despite the doubts, the uncertainty, the questions. It's saying yes. You know, it's one of the reasons why I've always enjoyed weddings. I know this sounds a little goofy, but when someone says to me, especially a young couple getting married, well, you know, Father, I don't believe in God. I go, that's okay. But you're going to get married anyway, right? And they go, what does that have to do with it? I said, excuse me, but you've come to know this man or this woman, and you've worked all of your life to this point to become an independent, capable human being. And then you're going to stand there in front of me on your wedding day and say, oh, not so much anymore. I'm going to throw it all away and become interdependent on this person. Excuse me, if that's not an act of faith, I don't know of anything better. I just don't. No one knows how it will turn out. But on your wedding day, you will state your faith. No. Faith is something that there's always room for doubt. But in the end, despite the doubts, we say yes. We say yes to God. Yes to all that God has promised. For as St. Peter reminds us, without seeing him, we believe. Without touching him, he has touched us. That in the end, we believe. Not because we know, but because we believe.